and welcome to the third edition of East Flank podcast. My name is Zuzana Gabrizova and I am the editor-in-chief of EU Brief.sk, formerly also known as Euractiv Slovakia. And this month, I will be the host of this podcast. Okay, so similarly to last month, this debate is kind of a continuation of our February collaborative article in which we have kind of looked at how our countries of the eastern flank, and for these purposes, it means the Visegrad countries, Finland, Bulgaria, Romania, Lithuania, and Latvia, how these countries basically kind of struggle to find just the right approach towards the current US administration under Donald Trump. So let me now just introduce our guests today. We will have represented Poland. Here with us is Aleksandra Krzysztoszek from Focus Europe, formerly Euractiv Poland. Welcome.
Hello.
And with us today is also Filip Slastovskis from Delphi, Latvia.
Hi.
So I think it's fair to say that for all of our countries and also for the three countries which are represented here now, that we share a tradition of strong Atlanticism in our foreign policies. What also this dates, of course, to the fall of Soviet Union, but also in this regard, what comes to mind is also the so-called Vilnius Group, which the group of Eastern European countries which supported in a very decisive way the US in their invasion to Iraq in 2003. Of course, since then, the world has changed a lot. And I think it would be interesting to begin with, I guess, my first questions or the first topic. To what extent is this consensus firm? I mean, has it ever been seriously questioned in your countries? And maybe I'll give an example for Slovakia and the reason why I'm asking this question. Because in 2018, when the current prime minister, Robert Fico, was forced to move into opposition, what he increasingly did is really use anti-American narratives in his politics. And also keeping in mind that Slovakia has historically a relatively strong pro-Russian sentiments and anti-EU sentiments. When we look at the data from 2019, for example, around 41% of Slovak view US as a threat and only 26% view Russia as a threat. So there is that. And as I said, in 2018, what Robert Fico did was basically adopted increasingly anti-American and pro-Russian rhetorics and invoking conspiracy theories and targeting liberal and pro-Western actors. And it was most visible during the approval of the Defense Cooperation Agreement with the US. It is this bilateral agreement that I think also other countries have with the US, and they very much rallied against this agreement. There were even rallies organized by Smer and his leader and current Prime Minister Robert Fico. Of course, what happened once they came back to power in 2023, this topic kind of went into background, and of course the agreement wasn't cancelled in the end. But it kind of shows that how in the political narratives also this strong US alignment can be somehow put into question when there are political reasons for it. So my question first for you both is if some episodes like this also can be found in your countries. And let's start with Poland.
Thank you, Susanna. Poland has always been seriously pro-Atlanticist, and I think it can even be called one of the most pro-Atlanticist EU countries. And it was no matter if Donald Tusk was in power or the nationalist Law and Justice Peace Party was running the show, let's say. Actually, Peace might have been even more focused on the Atlantic Alliance, seeing that they were pretty skeptical of the EU, which pushed them closer to Washington than Brussels, naturally. But also Tusk has always positioned himself as one of Europe's most pro-Atlanticist leaders, and it was even when Trump was in power between 2017 and 2020, and Tusk was the European Council president at that time. And here I can quote his famous 2018 words: "Dear America, appreciate your allies. After all, you don't have that many." But generally, America has consistently been seen as the foundation of Poland's security, and that's one of the few things that basically hasn't changed in Polish policy for decades, regardless of who was in charge, both in Warsaw and in Washington. But speaking of the Polish political scene, I think that probably the most hesitant force towards Donald Trump's policies and towards the role of Washington as such is, interestingly, the far-right Confederation. The Confederation leader, Krzysztof Bosak, reacted to Trump's US election win in 2024 by saying that Trump became the president of the United States, but not of the entire Western world, and that Poland should not rely on the US to secure and rescue, let's put it like this, the whole Europe. And also, the Confederation accused peace of being subservient to Trump. But generally, there is a consensus on the political scene that Poland needs an alliance with the US and that Europe cannot replace for that.
Right. As it happened, I was in Warsaw. I don't remember the exact year, but it was during the first term of Donald Trump. And I happened to be or come across this big rally in support of Trump. It was basically on the day when Trump was visiting Poland, and there was this big public rally for his support. Also, President Duda was there, and it was quite a bizarre experience for me at the time, because it was, I think, then when I realized how deep this partnership runs in Polish society. So it was really interesting to see even during the first term.
Yes, if I can add something, the peace government was extremely pro-Trump, and so was then President Andrzej Duda, whom you mentioned. And Duda was so pro-Trump, I would say, that he even proposed naming the permanent US base in Poland, if such base was formed, for Trump. But it's hard to say how much it was out of his admiration to Trump, or it was maybe just flattering Trump in order to achieve the goal of setting a permanent US base in Poland, but still it said something.
Right. And Philips, how was the Donald Trump's re-election received in Latvia? Am I correct that it was mainly analyzed through the lens of the ongoing Russian aggression against Ukraine, or how was it?
I think that everything in Latvia is always seen as this lens about security, about what's happening in Ukraine, and how can our relationship guarantee security. So this was the primary perspective, how to see the election of President Donald Trump. Because also in the past decades, since we got back our independence, we had never had any serious question about that we need to have those cooperation and strong Atlantic relations always, even if the prime ministers have been somehow in different political flanks or opinions, they are always defending also this. And it's basically, and it goes together with the Donald Trump as a personality or as a public figure, that it's more important that the NATO membership and the relations with US is basically seen as a fundamental to our survival. And given that we share that unfortunate border with Russia, and yes, there have been some voices arguing for more balanced or neutral foreign policy, but it haven't changed since Trump became in power. It never reshaped mainstream consensus. So if you would look to the Donald Trump as a person, he would be seen as in more negative way. But if you would look at cooperation with the US, then it would be still in a strong position.
And would you say that there are more political forces in Latvia that view Trump uncritically, or that's not the case? It's just kind of a pragmatic approach.
Well, I would say pragmatic. There is this party, Latvia First Party, which frames politics in some kind of binary way, that are you for or against Trump? And this populist party is mostly not mostly, but for Trump. There are no strong against, no parties that would be relevant. So no, there been some tragic comic cases. It happened recently that Speaker of the Latvian Parliament signed a letter. It was initiated by U.S. parliamentary figure. I unfortunately forgot which specific position. And this Latvian parliamentary speaker, she signed a letter proposing Donald Trump for a Nobel Peace Prize. And afterwards, it came out that she did it individually with her personal perception and understanding, and she didn't communicate it or align it together with the Latvian president or foreign ministry. She just did it. And she came from a party that is in those transatlantic relations mostly pragmatic. But such a case showed that understanding of how we should act at these times when Donald Trump is and his policy is changing world like totally, that how should we react and are we coordinated?
Alexandra, if I'm correct, I think that there was also some incident regarding the Nobel Prize for Donald Trump also within Polish politics. Is that right?
Yes, it was so. Ambassador Thomas Rose have announced cutting ties with the parliamentary speaker Włodzimierz Czarzasty for his refusal to endorse, in the name of the Polish parliament, Trump's ambitions to get the Nobel Peace Prize. And also, Czarzasty severely criticized Trump's foreign policy, which also met with a backlash from the ambassador. And this became quite an issue in Poland. Tusk backed Czarzasty, saying that partnership is not about preaching each other. And first, the ambassador rebuked this statement, saying that Tusk should rather say that to Czarzasty than to Washington. But then the issue somehow got silent. But I think this is one of the many cases in recent weeks with US ambassadors, which end up with calling ambassadors to the foreign ministries. So I think it has already been a consistent policy of Trump's administration that the ambassadors do interfere in the country's internal affairs, and they are quite bold in communications with Polish officials.
When it comes to Slovakia, when I think back on the time when after Donald Trump was re-elected, what comes to mind is that the Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico traveled to the USA, where he also, I'm not sure if he briefly met Trump, but certainly Fico took part in this big conservative event, and he had a speech there, and it was considered like a high honor from Trump that he was invited there. And I think he got even shout out from Trump by name in his speech. But very short after, there was this, of course, debate on tariffs and on Donald Trump's approach to tariffs, which, of course, would be devastating for Slovakia, especially given our dependence on automobile industry. So it was the moment when the government and when Fico kind of backtracked in his, admiration to Trump and called for like a European response and more framing it like, well, this is the world now and we need to deal with it. So that was kind of interesting from the Slovak perspective. And I also wanted to ask you, given we are all journalists here, how do you remember the infamous first meeting between Volodymyr Zelensky and Trump at the White House? I guess we all watched the meeting or the press conference after live that ended so badly. What did you think that it is like game over for Ukraine? How do you remember that, Phillips?
Outrageous. The feeling was, I was just simply angry about how such unrespectful and low level of empathy, diplomatic way is possible in White House. It was outrageous, I think. If it is in my personal view, if we look a little bit broader about it, was of course perceived as a symbolically tense. And then you, from one side, or not from one side, but of course you are fully supportive to Ukraine and Zelensky. And then you also have to keep in mind that US is your most important strategic partner that we have. Like if we speak about defense, so how to act in that way. I wouldn't like to be in foreign ministries or in our foreign policy stakeholders' shoes in that point. I understand also that this is one meeting. And sometimes we can get very emotional afterwards. And of course, it was important. But again, after that meeting, there have been different meetings and different statements and signals of friendship and signals of incompetence and signals misunderstandings. But somehow we are going on, and Ukraine is still fighting against this aggressive Russia. And this is the most important thing, that we are still fighting.
Indeed. Alexandra?
Well, I was quite shocked. We all were, but it wasn't totally shocking for me, I must say. I observed the whole first term of Trump in power, and I already knew how volatile and prone to changing his mind he is, and also emotional. And what I thought at that time, it was that Zelensky didn't really know how to play with Trump. Like, for instance, former NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg knew how to do that, and Mark Rutte also knows that now. It seems like dealing with Trump involves a bit of flattering him, like schmoozing to get anywhere. And yes, it is a bit embarrassing, but it seems to work. And Rutte was criticized for calling Trump daddy. But frankly, I think this is what you do with Trump if you want to get something from him. And I even defended one of my master's theses, arguing that it was largely due to Stoltenberg's rhetoric that Trump did not ultimately withdraw the US from NATO. So speaking about Zelensky, I think that, of course, he is proud and the whole Ukraine is proud, but with Trump, you use different tools to deal with him.
In our collaborative article, we dealt also with our country's reactions to the crisis earlier this year. Particularly, of course, we are talking about Greenland and Venezuela, or rather Venezuela and then Greenland, and how our political leadership kind of reacted to that. And I just found it really fascinating how in most other countries, the leadership really tried to navigate it in a very difficult manner, how to on one side react to the reality, but on the other hand, not to mention Trump and the US at any price. I think it was kind of funny in a way. When I look at Slovakia's reaction, there was somewhat stronger reaction to Venezuela than it was to Greenland. But nevertheless, Prime Minister Robert Fico mainly used this occasion, and again, this is what he does usually, to divert the attention where he needs it. And he used these incidents to criticize the EU for various reasons. But that's how he does things in his political communication. And even though on the level of Ministry of Foreign Affairs, there have been some, let's say, condemnation or some declaration that, Denmark and Greenland are sovereign nations and they need to decide about themselves and so on. When it came to a Fico meeting with Trump, which happened in February, and also a few days ago with Rubio, as far as we know, those issues were not raised on those meetings. So I was just wondering, guys, what stood out the most to you from your country's reaction? I mean, we do not have to cover all of it, just maybe the most interesting bits.
I can start maybe that I think it was some kind of easy game, if we speak that attitude towards Greenland. And also the foreign ministers of Baltic states came out with united position that Greenland is integral part of Denmark and that should be respected. And this is one story. Another story was, and somehow they of course tried to avoid it also Trump element there and all his statements. And the second about Venezuela, it was more easy because there is some authoritarian and dictator, and it's easy to condemn somebody like him. And so on Venezuela, Latvia was more direct. And okay, maybe those in Venezuela life will be better right now. So that was also a political direction how we acted towards those events.
Sure. Alexandra?
Well, Venezuela was quite shocking in Poland, especially for those who still prioritize international order, and such a clear violation of established international norms left many, I'd say, astonished. But still, some politicians tried to make a political use of it, combining Maduro's case with the Polish political situation. For instance, some peace politicians and peace-connected journalists, like they posted in the social media pictures of Maduro asking whether Donald Tusk would be next. So it was quite, shocking. They combine everything that goes on in the international politics, they combine it with the Polish politics. With Greenland, it came a bit less loud in Poland. Of course, Donald Tusk commented on the issue several times, but I think the issue wasn't as big as in other European countries. And Tusk didn't decide to send troops to Greenland, unlike other leaders, because we as Poland have our priorities on the eastern flank. But interestingly, there were rumors that Tusk reportedly wanted to send some small contingent to Greenland, but there was a backlash. But those are just rumors, and I don't want to comment on it because nobody has confirmed that.
Interesting. Okay, maybe let's conclude with one last topic that we also a little bit touched upon in our article, but maybe we could elaborate in cases of our countries a bit further. And is it fair to say that in your countries, I will say something about Slovakia, the dependencies, let's call it, on your United States in terms of defense equipment, military equipment, and even energy is increasing in last years? Because it's a trend that we are seeing, for example, in Slovakia, definitely. Of course, it's a result to the Russian aggression, of course, at our borders. But I think it's quite interesting to keep that in mind and keep that in discussion and in our analysis of what's going on, because every dependence is a vulnerability also in the end. So when it comes to Slovakia, there are definitely many purchases now going on, especially focusing on F-16 aircrafts, but many other American systems have already been purchased or are under discussion right now. So, and as you can imagine, those are really big sums, especially in times when the fiscal situation of Slovakia is quite dire. So that is one thing. The other is, of course, Slovakia is discussing and has signed a memorandum with the US about possibly developing a huge 15 billion euro nuclear power project, of course, potentially with the US company Westinghouse. So that's again an historic deal that is happening. So what's the situation in our countries? And of course, if you can say, what's the actual American military presence in your countries, that will be also maybe interesting to hear.
I think the first response what I would have that last year we got news that German Rheinmetall will build a factory in Latvia. So let's see that we try to diversify the dependency from US infrastructure. But of course, it's not enough. It would be an answer only for a long-term policy, because at the current times, right now when war is happening and Ukraine is still fighting, I think that realistically no serious security actor in public sector or in media companies or among experts, universities, believes that a viable architecture exists outside NATO and cooperation with US in at least foreseeable future. That's something that where we want to be, because we see that after Trump's era that something is granted, that in one day he can say something and the next day something totally different. So we definitely need stronger European defense capacity, but it's something in future right now that we need to build right now. And people in Latvia are, I would say, quite skeptical, because all the stories and all discourses about European defense capacities, it's always somehow connected with a slow process, with a bureaucracy, with different approaches, and Latvians would see it as skeptical.
I see. Alexandra?
Poland certainly doesn't want to give up its dependency of the US, and it must be said that Poland has always been a staunch opponent of the EU emancipation from the US, and it was regardless of the government in power. For instance, if I can provide one instance, it had already been in 2017 when the PESCO program was launched, that then Peace, Foreign and Defense Ministers Witold Waszczykowski and Antoni Macierewicz had serious doubts about the initiative, and they were concerned about a potential duplication of NATO efforts, and they went as far as to issue a letter to then High Representative Federica Mogherini, setting the conditions for Poland to join PESCO. Ultimately, Poland joined the initiative, but that shows that Poland has already had doubts about Europe enhancing its defense capabilities. And Donald Tusk's government is maybe more liberal, but it is not very much different with regards to the so-called European sovereignty that is highly proposed and promoted by French President Emmanuel Macron. And Poland supports the EU's efforts to enhance its defense potential, but it staunchly opposes any efforts that would come at the cost of NATO. And Poland has got a big US military presence right now. It's about 10,000 troops, but they are stationed on a rotating basis. We still don't have a permanent base, which is, I think, our principal goal regarding the US presence in Poland. And Poland enhances its cooperation with the US, both when it comes to defense agreements and buying equipment from the US, and hence Warsaw's insisting on any EU's initiative to include buying equipment from the US. So Poland is a bit skeptical of the initiatives that would rule out American equipment. So I think that's what we say about the current state, but Poland certainly doesn't want to split with the US when it comes to its defense engagement in Europe.
It seems to be the case for, all of the countries that we have in East Flank project. And for anyone interested in of this region, it can be found in our article on East Flank webpage. So feel free. So yeah, thank you guys for this discussion. It was a pleasure. So once again, thank you, Aleksandra Krzysztoczek from Focus Europe and Filip Slastowskis from Delphi, Latvia. And my name is Zuzana Gabrizova, and hopefully we will hear each other again in the next podcast. Bye.